Becoming yourself will cost you, people, not because you're wrong, but because you're real. And almost no one warns you about that price. Most people aren't lonely because they're alone. They're lonely because they're living someone else's life. And here's the uncomfortable, almost heretical truth. The moment you start becoming who you actually are, life doesn't get louder, it gets quieter. Fewer voices, fewer certainties, fewer places where you automatically belong. Carl Jung called this individuation, and he didn't romanticize it. He warned us, it is a lonely journey. But what if that loneliness isn't a problem to fix, and instead, it's proof that something in you is finally aligning? What if the silence you're afraid of is the doorway to clarity, strength, and inner authority? In this video, you'll understand why feeling alone might be the most important psychological signal of your life, and how to move through it without losing yourself, numbing out, or turning back. You're not broken. You're not lost. You're early in a process few people are willing to finish. And once you see what's really happening beneath the surface, you'll never interpret your loneliness the same way again. You didn't wake up one day feeling different for no reason. That quiet discomfort you carry, that sense of something missing, isn't random at all. It's the earliest sign of individuation beginning to stir inside you. At first, it doesn't shout. It whispers. It shows up as restlessness, as loneliness you can't explain, as the feeling that your current identity fits like a borrowed coat. And here's the uncomfortable truth. Most people silence that call with noise. More work, more scrolling, more opinions. But you? You're still listening. That's already rare. Think of this inner call like a compass buried under layers of dust. The world hands you maps, career paths, roles, expectations, but none of them point north for your psyche. When solitude creeps in, it's not there to punish you, it's there to clear the static. Loneliness becomes the first gate of selfhood, not because you're failing socially, but because you're outgrowing psychological shortcuts. Carl Jung understood this deeply. Transformation doesn't announce itself publicly. It begins in private confusion, long before clarity arrives. You might notice it during ordinary moments, driving alone at night, sitting quietly after everyone's gone to sleep. That subtle ache that says, this can't be all there is. That's not weakness, it's inner growth asking for space. The psyche doesn't evolve in crowds, it evolves in pauses. And here's the kicker. If you ignore this call long enough, it doesn't disappear. It turns into anxiety, resentment, or a low-grade sadness that follows you everywhere like a shadow you can't outrun. Practically speaking, this is where small, deliberate actions matter. Not dramatic life changes. Yet. Start with solitude that has intention. Walk without headphones, journal without censoring yourself. Read authors who explore the inner world. Jung, James Hollis, even Viktor Frankl. These aren't just books, they're mirrors. Each page helps you recognize parts of your psyche you've never been introduced to. This isn't about becoming someone new. It's about remembering who you were before adaptation became survival. And here's what no one tells you. Once you hear this call clearly, you can't unhear it. Loneliness sharpens. Your old identity starts to feel thinner, like worn fabric. Conversations that once satisfied you may start to feel hollow. This isn't arrogance, it's recalibration. You're standing at the edge of something deeper, something that demands courage before comfort. And just beneath this quiet awakening, another challenge is already forming. The moment when the path begins to narrow. At some point, you start noticing it almost by accident. Fewer messages, fewer invitations, fewer people who really get what you're becoming. And no, it's not because you've become cold or distant. It's because individuation naturally narrows the path. Growth is selective, like a river carving its way through stone. The deeper it goes, the more precise it becomes. The crowd prefers wide roads. Your inner growth demands something else entirely. Here's the paradox no one warns you about. As your selfhood strengthens, your social world may shrink. Not dramatically at first, just subtly. Jokes that once landed feel flat. Conversations recycle the same surface-level scripts. You're not superior. You're simply no longer oriented toward the same psychological center. The psyche doesn't abandon people out of cruelty. It sheds what no longer fits its direction. And that shedding feels like loneliness before it feels like freedom. Think of it like upgrading your internal operating system while everyone else is still running the old version. You don't argue about it. You don't announce it. You just notice incompatibilities. This is where many people panic. They assume something's wrong and rush back to familiarity, old habits, old roles, old versions of their identity. But the narrowing isn't a mistake, it's a signal. It's life saying, choose depth or choose comfort. But you can't have both forever. And on a practical level, this is where discernment becomes your best skill. You don't need to cut people off dramatically. You simply stop over-explaining yourself. You invest energy where there's resonance. Maybe that means spending more time learning, diving into books like Man and His Symbols or The Alchemist, or listening to voices that challenge rather than soothe you. Maybe it means fewer social outings and more deliberate solitude. This isn't isolation, it's refinement. And here's the quiet truth. The narrower the path becomes, the clearer your direction feels. Loneliness here is informational. It shows you where alignment is missing. It teaches you to stand without constant reinforcement. But just when you think you've adjusted to this narrowing, something deeper begins to crack. Because the next stage isn't just about fewer people. It's about letting go of the mask you've worn to belong. For a long time, the mask worked. It helped you belong, succeed, survive. You learned what to say, how to behave, when to stay quiet. That mask became your public identity, polished and functional. But here's the catch. The more your inner growth accelerates, the heavier that mask feels. What once protected you now suffocates you. And the loneliness that follows isn't sudden. It's the slow realization that you're being applauded for a version of yourself that no longer feels real. This is where individuation turns uncomfortable. You begin to sense a split between who you appear to be and who you actually are. The psyche hates living divided. It leaks through in fatigue, irritability, or that strange emptiness you feel even when things are going well. You might notice it at work, laughing at jokes that don't move you, nodding along to conversations that drain you. The mask keeps the peace, but it steals your vitality. And deep down, you know it. Think of the mask like wearing formal shoes 2 sizes too small. At first, you tolerate the pain because everyone else seems comfortable. But as time passes, every step hurts. Eventually, standing still hurts too. Most people don't remove the mask. They numb the pain. They distract themselves. But you're here because you're tired of numbing. Selfhood demands exposure. It asks you to risk being misunderstood rather than continue betraying yourself quietly. Practically, this stage shows up in small but courageous shifts. You stop agreeing automatically. You choose honesty over likability. You might decline opportunities that look good on paper but feel hollow inside. Maybe you begin speaking your truth with fewer disclaimers. Reading Jung or Erich Fromm helps here, not as theory, but as validation. You realize you're not broken, you're transitioning. The mask didn't fail you, it simply completed its job. And here's the part no one prepares you for. When the mask loosens, familiar voices often go quiet. Some people preferred you predictable, manageable, easy to read. When that version fades, so does their comfort. This isn't cruelty, it's incompatibility. And just as you're learning to breathe without the mask, another silence emerges. The silence left behind when familiar connections no longer echo back. There's a particular kind of loneliness that doesn't come from being alone, but from being unrecognized. You're still in the same rooms, around the same people, yet something shifted. The laughter doesn't reach you the same way. The conversations feel oddly distant. This is the moment when familiar voices fall silent, not because they vanished, but because they no longer know how to speak to the person you're becoming. And yes, it stings more than outright rejection ever could. Your psyche is recalibrating, and not everyone can follow that movement. Think of it like changing altitude. Some relationships are built for sea level. They function beautifully there. But as your inner growth pulls you higher, the air thins. Fewer people can breathe comfortably beside you. This isn't a judgment. It's physics. Individuation changes your internal pressure, and silence is often the first symptom of that change. You might be tempted to chase the old echoes, to explain yourself, to overcompensate, to shrink just enough to fit back into conversations that once felt like home. That urge is human, but notice what it costs you. Every time you abandon your emerging selfhood to preserve familiarity, you delay your own becoming. Silence, in this phase, is a teacher. It shows you which connections were sustained by habit rather than truth. This is where practical grounding matters. Instead of filling the silence with noise, use it to listen inward. Journal about what's changing in you, not poetically, but honestly. Pay attention to where your energy grows and where it drains. Replace compulsive social scrolling with something that strengthens your inner spine. Long walks, thoughtful reading, learning a skill that requires focus. Silence stops being empty when you give it intention. And slowly, something unexpected happens. The absence of familiar voices creates space. Space for discernment, space for depth, space for new resonance you can't yet name. The loneliness shifts shape. It becomes quieter, more stable, less desperate. And just when you start trusting this silence, another challenge appears. The moment you must learn to stand without mirrors at all. There comes a moment when the reflections disappear. No feedback, no validation, no familiar reactions to tell you who you are or how you're doing. This is where most people feel exposed and retreat. But this is also where individuation quietly matures. Standing unmirrored forces you to confront a question you've avoided your whole life. Who are you when no one is watching, applauding, or correcting you? The loneliness here isn't loud, it's vast, and it's honest. Your psyche has relied on mirrors for years, family, culture, friends, roles, to shape your identity. When those mirrors fade, disorientation follows. You might feel unsure, even clumsy, like learning to walk in the dark. But this darkness isn't emptiness. It's potential. Think of it like learning balance after the training wheels come off. At first you wobble, then something clicks. You realize balance was always internal. This phase demands courage because there's no script. You can't perform your way through it. You begin to notice how often you used external cues to decide what mattered, what was enough, what success looked like. Without mirrors, values become personal. You start choosing based on resonance, not reward. Selfhood begins to feel less like an idea and more like an internal compass you actually trust. Practically, this is where inner discipline replaces external motivation. You read not to impress, but to understand. Books like The Courage to Be by Paul Tillich or Jung's Reflections on the Self. You create routines that no one applauds. Morning reflection, writing, learning something difficult just because it stretches you. These acts seem small, but they rewire your sense of authority. You stop outsourcing meaning, and something subtle but powerful happens. The loneliness changes texture. It no longer feels like lack. It feels like space. Space to hear yourself think. Space to choose without negotiation. Space where your inner growth stabilizes. But just as this inner footing strengthens, another realization begins to surface. Solitude itself isn't the destination, it's an initiation into something deeper still. At first, solitude feels like a void. No applause, no reassurance, no one confirming that you're on the right track. But then something shifts. You begin to realize that solitude isn't absence. It's a threshold. In the language of individuation, this is initiation, like ancient rites of passage that remove the initiate from the tribe before transformation. Your psyche requires distance from the familiar to reorganize itself. Loneliness here isn't random, it's deliberate. Think of solitude as the forge where your selfhood is tempered. Heat, pressure, and time reshape raw material into something resilient. Without solitude, there's no internal authority, only borrowed beliefs and second-hand values. This is why so many people avoid being alone with themselves. Silence exposes inconsistencies. It removes distractions. It asks you to sit with parts of your identity you've never properly met. Emotionally, this stage is intense because it strips away comfort narratives. You may feel unproductive, lost, or even invisible, but invisibility here is freedom. No role to maintain, no expectations to fulfill. Just you and the slow, sometimes uncomfortable unfolding of inner growth. This is where patience becomes power. The psyche doesn't rush integration. It moves in cycles, not deadlines. On a practical level, initiation requires structure, not chaos. Solitude without intention becomes stagnation. Solitude with ritual becomes transformation. Simple practices matter, fixed times for reflection, reading works that stretch you. Jung, Hillman, or even philosophical fiction like Siddhartha. Physical practices help too. Long walks, controlled breathing, limiting constant input. These aren't self-help tricks, they're containers for psychological change. And here's the paradox. The deeper you enter solitude, the less lonely it feels. You start sensing an inner companionship forming, a dialogue that doesn't flatter you, but tells you the truth. This inner presence steadies you. And just as solitude begins to feel meaningful rather than heavy, something unexpected emerges. An internal relationship that replaces the need for constant external confirmation. At some point, the silence starts talking back. Not loudly, not dramatically, but steadily. This is the birth of what Jung called the inner relationship. When external validation fades, something inside you steps forward. An inner companion forms, shaped by reflection, honesty, and time spent alone. It doesn't flatter you, it doesn't rush you, but it stays. And for the first time, your psyche feels less fragmented, less dependent on outside approval to feel real. This inner companion isn't imagination, it's integration. You begin to recognize your patterns, your fears, your strengths, without needing someone else to point them out. Loneliness shifts again. It no longer feels like abandonment, it feels like privacy. Individuation deepens here because you stop outsourcing judgment. Your selfhood gains a steady internal witness, someone who sees you clearly even when no one else is looking. You might notice this in small moments. You pause before reacting instead of seeking reassurance. You tolerate uncertainty without immediately filling it with noise. You hear your own intuition more distinctly, like a voice that's been drowned out for years, finally finding room to breathe. This is inner growth made practical. It changes how you make decisions. Slower, yes, but more aligned. There are simple ways to strengthen this inner dialogue. Writing is one of the most powerful, not performative journaling, but honest dialogue, asking yourself uncomfortable questions and waiting for real answers. Reading reflective works helps too, especially authors who speak to the interior life. Even moments of deliberate silence, 10 minutes without stimulation, teach you how to listen inwardly without panic. And something subtle but profound happens. You begin to feel accompanied even when you're alone. The old fear of loneliness loses its grip. You don't need constant affirmation because you've built a relationship that doesn't leave when things get difficult. But just as this inner stability settles in, another truth appears. Not everyone reaches this point, and there's a reason why many turn back before they ever meet themselves this deeply. This is where the path quietly empties, not because it's blocked, but because it asks too much. Most people mistake this phase of individuation for failure. They feel the weight of loneliness, the absence of applause, the uncertainty, and assume they've taken a wrong turn. So they go back to familiar roles, back to borrowed identity, back to lives that feel busy but strangely hollow. Turning back isn't weakness, it's misunderstanding the process. Your psyche resists transformation when comfort is still available. The mind prefers certainty over truth, even if that certainty slowly suffocates selfhood. This is why people abandon inner work just as it begins to matter. The loneliness intensifies right before integration. It's like stopping a long climb because your legs burn, never realizing the view was minutes away. Inner growth always tests commitment before it offers meaning. You might recognize this temptation in subtle ways. The urge to over-socialize, to numb yourself with entertainment, to chase validation through productivity or comparison. These aren't moral failures, they're escape hatches. The psyche looks for exits when pressure rises, but every escape delays alignment. You don't lose progress, you pause it. And deep down, you know when you're postponing your own becoming. Practically, staying the course here means simplifying rather than adding. Fewer distractions, clearer priorities, choosing depth over dopamine. This could mean limiting social media, committing to a reading practice that challenges you, or setting aside time each week for honest self-review. Not judgment, observation. You're learning to stay present when discomfort appears instead of running from it. And here's the quiet truth. Those who stay don't feel braver. They feel tired of repeating the same inner cycle. Something in you is done turning back. You're beginning to sense that loneliness isn't the enemy, it's the final filter. And just beyond this filter, something solid starts forming. A strength that can only be born in isolation. There's a kind of strength you can't fake, borrow, or perform. It doesn't announce itself. It doesn't need witnesses. It's forged quietly in isolation after you've stayed when it would have been easier to leave. This is where individuation stops feeling fragile and starts feeling solid. Loneliness no longer shakes you. It steadies you. You're not tougher because life got easier. You're stronger because you stopped needing constant reinforcement. Your psyche reorganizes itself here. Decisions feel cleaner. You don't second-guess every choice. You still doubt, sure, but doubt no longer paralyzes you. This is the kind of inner authority that comes from facing yourself without shortcuts. Selfhood becomes embodied, not conceptual. You trust your judgment not because it's perfect, but because it's yours. Think of this strength like a tree growing in an open field. No walls, no shelter. Wind hits it from every direction. At first, it bends. Over time, its roots deepen. When storms come, it doesn't panic. It holds. Isolation does the same thing to you. It forces you to develop internal structure. Without it, you're always bracing against external weather. In practical terms, this strength shows up in how you live day to day. You don't rush to explain yourself. You choose commitments carefully. You invest time in things that compound, learning, health, reflection, rather than chasing quick validation. Reading demanding books, maintaining physical discipline, keeping promises to yourself even when no one knows. These are the quiet reps that build inner muscle. And here's the paradox. Once this strength stabilizes, loneliness almost disappears. Not because people return, but because need dissolves. You could be alone or surrounded and feel the same centeredness. But just as this solidity settles in, a final realization begins to surface. The most important transformations happen without witnesses at all. Some of the most important moments of your life will happen in complete silence. No announcement, no audience, no one to say, "I see you." And yet those moments shape everything that comes after. This is the final truth of individuation. Real transformation rarely has witnesses. It happens internally, quietly, when your psyche aligns in ways the world may never fully notice, but will eventually feel. At this stage, your relationship with loneliness changes one last time. It no longer feels like a phase to survive. It feels like a place you've learned to stand. Your selfhood isn't dependent on recognition anymore. You don't need to be understood by everyone because you finally understand yourself well enough. This is where inner growth becomes irreversible. Not dramatic, not flashy, just deeply rooted. Think of it like tectonic plates shifting beneath the surface. No one sees the movement, but when the landscape changes, it's undeniable. You speak differently. You choose differently. You walk away from things that once controlled you without making a scene. Your identity becomes quieter and stronger at the same time. And paradoxically, that quiet strength draws the right people closer without effort. Practically living without witnesses means staying committed when motivation fades. Continuing practices that no longer feel exciting but feel true. Reading, reflecting, maintaining boundaries, choosing depth over distraction, even when no one is counting. This is where discipline turns into devotion. You're no longer improving yourself, you're inhabiting yourself. And here's the subtle opening to what comes next. Once you've learned to become without witnesses, your presence alone begins to speak. You no longer chase meaning, you carry it. And from that place, something new emerges. Not the end of the journey, but the quiet readiness to live it fully in the world on your own terms. Now comes the part most people avoid. Applying what you've just understood. Not tomorrow, not when life gets quieter. Now. Because awareness without action slowly turns into frustration. Loneliness showed up in your life for a reason, to push you inward, not to paralyze you. The real question is, what are you going to do with the space it created? You don't need to change everything at once. Start small, but start honestly. Protect moments of solitude instead of escaping them. Choose depth over distraction, even when no one is watching. Pay attention to what drains you and what strengthens you. Read voices that challenge you. Build routines that serve your inner life, not just your image. Becoming yourself isn't about adding more. It's about removing what was never truly yours. Ask yourself this and don't rush the answer. Where have I been betraying myself just to belong? What version of me keeps showing up out of habit, not truth? And what would my life look like if I stopped running from the silence and actually listened to it? This journey is lonely. Yes, but it's also the only one that leads to something real. Few people walk it, fewer finish it. If this message resonated, it's because some part of you already knows you're meant for more than adaptation, more than survival, more than applause. If you want to keep exploring this path with clarity, depth, and psychological truth, subscribe to Mind's Silent Echo and turn on notifications. More conversations like this are coming, and they're meant for those who are brave enough to look inward and keep going.